Now here in chapter 3.4, we're going to pick up with the law of supply, which is the opposite of the law of demand. Now let's take a look at the law of supply by definition. So the law of supply is going to be the quantity of a good supplied in a given time period increases as the price increases, ceteris paribus, or all other things held constant, and vice versa, meaning that if the price goes down, then you would expect that the amount that firms would want to sell or supply would also go down. This is known as a direct relationship between price and quantity. Anytime you have a direct relationship, it means if one thing goes up, the other thing goes up, or if one thing goes down, the other thing goes down. If that's true between the two things, then they have a direct relationship. This generates what's known as an upward sloping curve. So unlike the demand curve, which is downward sloping, the law of supply is upward sloping. Now, just like with demand, we not only have price as a reason for changing what we're doing. Remember, with demand, we had what the quantity, the law of demand specified that the quantity demanded was determined by the price, and then other things like income, tastes, and preferences, and other factors change the entire demand curve. We're going to find the same thing is true for supply. With supply, the quantity supplied is the amount that firms are willing to produce at a particular price, and if the price changes, they want to change the way how much they want to produce. But there's other factors besides the price of the good itself that gets people to want to change how much they produce. And we have a nice list right here, and we'll go over in detail on them in the next couple of slides. But the technology of production, the factor costs, in other words, the cost of resources, taxes and subsidies, expectations of prices and business conditions in the future, the prices of other goods, and the number of sellers. So, just like with demand, every one of these factors, 1 through 6, if they change, they will shift the entire supply curve. We won't just be moving along the supply curve. Anytime you're moving along the supply curve, it's because the price changed, and that's why you're changing your behavior. But if any of these factors 1 through 6 change, you're going to be shifting the entire curve. So if the entire curve shifts to the right, that's because there's been an increase in supply. And if it shifts to the left, there's been a decrease in supply. Now let's talk about shifting the entire supply curve as we've already discussed. Remember, on the previous slide, we had a list of the different things that would do it. Now let's go into a little bit of detail on each one of them. Suppose you have a new technology that lowers operating costs. I'll give you an example. Let's assume that you are a roofing contractor and you hire carpenters to nail the roofs onto houses, and you're doing it by hand with a hammer and nails. So it takes a long time for your carpenters, and they're not goofing off, they're working hard, but obviously they're relatively slow because a hammer and nails is a pretty slow technology. Now, somebody comes along and invents the air-powered nail gun. And so now your existing carpenters can do twice the amount of work with the nail gun that they used to do. So since you can now do twice the number of roofs for the same number of carpenter hours that you pay for, what just happened to the profitability of owning a roofing company? Obviously it just went up, right? So do you think it's logical that both the existing roofing companies would be happy when try to expand production, and new people would want to get into the roofing business now that they see how profitable it is? So that's the whole idea behind number 1. You would expect that you would not require that people pay more for roofs to get construction companies to want to build more roofs, even at the same price. Let's say a normal roof costs $8,000 to replace an entire roof. Well, now that you have a nail gun, you'd be willing to do even more roofs, even at the $8,000 price, because this is now a much more profitable thing. Okay, so I went into more detail on the first one than I will go into all the others. I just want you to see the logic behind why we believe this will be true. Now let's take a look at factor cost decrease. Now remember, we talked about factors of production earlier. One of the factors of production is labor. Let's continue with our roofing company example. You own a roofing company and you're hiring carpenters. You pay them $30 an hour. And then for some reason, wages for carpenters falls to $20 an hour. Let's assume because of competition from illegal immigrants, whatever. There's a huge influx of people, drives down the wages in that particular industry. So you as a roofing contractor can now hire workers for less. You're still charging $8,000 to put the roof on. We're assuming nothing else changes. Remember, in all these arguments, one thing is changing at a time. The pay of carpenters goes down, but you're still able to charge $8,000 for the roof. What just happened to the profitability of putting roofs on houses? Just went up dramatically, didn't it? So if you are an existing roofing contractor, you'd love to expand your business, and anyone else thinking about getting in the roofing business would now decide, yes, I think I'd like to do that. All of that would expand the number of roofs being built, even though the price has remained at $8,000. Okay? So now we have two reasons why we would shift the entire supply curve. Let's go to number 3. How about tax decreases? Well, I think that should be pretty obvious. To a business person, paying a tax is no different than paying your workers. It's just one more cost you have to deal with. So if taxes decrease, it'd be no different than if labor went down in price. So you get the exact same reaction in number 3 that you got in number 2. Number 4, future prices are expected to rise. So let's assume for some reason that people want to buy more roofs. I don't know, maybe we're expecting a much bigger hurricane season next year, so you're expecting a lot more damaged roofs. So you believe you'll be able to charge not just $8,000 next year for a roof, you'll be able to charge $12,000 to do the same roof. Okay? What do you think? Do you think people would like to get into the roofing business if they thought they could do that? So if everyone expects a major increase in hurricanes, I would suspect that the number of roofing companies getting into business would go up. So that's all that number 4 is talking about. Now, number 5, the price of alternative goods falls. Picture in your mind, again, this one might not make as much sense, but let's think about a construction company that they have 2 divisions. One puts roofs on houses, the other builds swimming pools. And then for some reason, the price of swimming pools falls. Let's assume that homeowners decide that the legal liability of owning a pool is just too high because maybe the law changed and it makes you liable for more things. So the average homeowner now decides, I don't really want a pool. So what happens to the price of pools? They go down because there's not as many buyers. You're in the construction business, you can make either pools or you can make roofs. Which one of those do you want to ramp up? Does everyone agree? You'd be way more interested in sticking with the roofing side of your business, and you'd probably cut back on the pool building side of your business. So that's what number 5 is about. Here we're talking about alternative goods falling, making your industry, which is the non-alternative, now looks more desirable. So more people are doing it. And then, of course, the number of sellers increasing. That should be pretty obvious. If there's more people in the roofing business for whatever reason, you would expect the number of roofs being produced would increase. Now, of course, if all those other things I mentioned, 1 through 6, moved in the opposite direction, in other words, if technology actually declined, that's pretty hard to imagine. You can't uninvent things. So technology almost never goes down. But under number 2, that would be possible, right? Factor costs instead of decreasing, giving you a reason to increase your production. What if factor costs increased? So the price of lumber went up, the price of your carpenters went up, any one of those things. If the price you could charge for the roof stayed at $8,000, which we're assuming, and the cost of any of your factors of production went up, your profits would be squeezed, it would be less profitable to be in the roofing business, and rational human beings would avoid the roofing business. Existing roofers would decide to cut back on the amount they do, and of course new people would decide, no, I'm not getting in the roofing business. You can't make any good money there. So we could see that, I'm not going to go through every one of them. I think if you just did it logically, you would recognize that every one of the opposite moves, in other words, instead of having an increase as we see in all these issues, if you had an opposite move, it would decrease the supply or the willingness to produce. Now, just as I had mentioned earlier in this set of lectures, there's a difference between movements along a curve and shifts of the entire curve. So one more time, we're going to use this slide to remind ourselves of something here. Whenever you say a change in the quantity of something, quantity supplied or quantity demanded, you're moving along the same curve, either the same supply curve or the same demand curve, due to a change in the price. So price is the only motivating factor. It's a change in the quantity supplied. Now, A change in supply means we're shifting the entire supply curve due to one or more changes in the determinants of supply, but not in a response to a change in the price of the good itself, because that's already been captured in the change in quantity supplied, which is moving along the curve. So, moving along the curve captured by a price change of itself, that is, and moving the entire curve would be one of the other determinants. Now, the market supply. Just like with market demand, we recognize that market supply is simply all of the suppliers added up together to reach the market supply, just like the market demand was adding up all the individual demanders, consumers, until we get the entire market. So each producer is willing and able to produce a good or a service at a specific price. And so the amount produced depends on its price. If the price goes up, more will be produced. If the price goes down, less will be produced. We call that the law of demand. And then the market supply then is going to be the collective summation of all producers' individual supplies, which is just a fancy way of saying, if you add up all the individual gas stations, what do you end up with? The entire market for the selling of gas, right? That's, this is not as fancy as the language is, it's not really a hard concept. So always remember, when we use the terms supply and demand, market this, market that, what we're really talking about is the collection of all the people who are involved in the market, either on the buying side, which we call demand, or on the selling side, which we call supply. Now let's just do it graphically. Now this is here, let's use gas stations as our example. Here in the first graph, we have Anne. She owns this gas station, and this is her supply curve. So that means that these different prices, she's willing to produce different amounts. Here's Bob's supply curve. Here's Carlos's supply curve. And if you horizontally sum them, in other words, pick a price. Here's one price. Come across here and see how much Anne would be willing to do. Find out how much Bob's willing to do. Find out how much Carlos is willing to do. Add them all up. And here you are at this point right here. You can see this white dot as compared to all the black dots. That's just taking all these white dots here, adding them up, and you come up with this white dot here for the entire market. And you notice if you actually add up the numbers, we'll do it for just one of them. The rest you can check for yourself. But you notice Anne at $45 is willing to supply what looks like about 90 something here. And then Bob is willing to do a little bit over 30, so 90 and 30 is like 120. And then Carlos is willing to do a little over 10, so it's 140 something. And you notice that's exactly what it shows here, right? 140. So this 140 for the entire market is just the 90 plus 30 plus 10 that we see for the different individuals who are supplying. Because some gas stations are huge, like a big QT, and a small country gas station with only 2 pumps might be Carlos's. So you wouldn't expect them to produce the same amount of gasoline per day, or rather, let me go back and come up with another example. This one is a Costco gas station. Ever seen how much gas they do? Or maybe a Buc-ee's. Have you been to one of those yet? With 100 gas pumps? So this is a Buc-ee's, this is an ordinary BP or Shell, and this is a little country gas station with only 2 pumps. But they're all responding to the price and producing different amounts given the size of their station. And then the production of all gasoline would be on the market supply curve measured by all of the individual firms selling combined together.